thank you so much, Alan. It is wonderful to see you again, and but I don't know what kind of day Al's going to have. He doesn't know what time it is, who he is, or where he is. But other than that, he's a great guy. We love him. Now, I work so closely with Al, and I thank him. I feel like that almost every day here in my job. You know, it moves so fast, and there's so many things going on, but it really is a great opportunity, and thank you all for allowing me just to share a few thoughts with you all before lunch. And it's always dangerous for anyone to stand between a hungry group and lunch, so I'm going to do this quickly, and then unfortunately have to slip out. Today is our caucus luncheons, as those of you that are Hillites know, so I've got to get to my caucus before too long. But let me begin by thanking all of the corporate leadership here for what you have done, what you're doing today and this week, as some of the colleagues were reminding me as I came through the door, and what you're going to do in the next months and years for Louisiana and the Gulf Coast, which has been my focus and been my heart. It's not my only interest. How we respond to catastrophes everywhere in the world, actually, is something that I'm very interested in. But as you can imagine, being the senator from Louisiana, I've been particularly focused on the catastrophes that continue to find us somehow in Louisiana and the Gulf Coast, with the 4 major storms that occurred in 2005 through 2008, and then the catastrophic oil spill in the Gulf, which has been very difficult for us to respond to. And then subsequent to the spill was a policy by the federal government, one that I strongly disagree with, which has now shut down most drilling in the Gulf, which has caused an economic catastrophe of its own and was unnecessary, not recommended, and very unwise. But nonetheless, we're struggling with getting people back to work with the almost entire offshore oil and gas industry shut down, not just the deep water, but the shallow water. And I know some Shell folks are here and some others. You all may be, well, not may, you're very familiar with what's going on. Maybe the other companies that don't directly deal with oil and gas may not be aware, but we are really facing an economic downturn of a serious nature because of the policies of removing most of the permits from the Gulf. There were 65 shallow water permits issued, and I'll get back on subject in a minute, but just to get this off my chest, there were 65 shallow water permits issued for drilling in the Gulf in the 6 months prior to the spill. And the months subsequent to the closure of the well, which was a horrific accident and should never have happened and did, and that's a whole other story. There have only been 6 permits, and that's shallow water, which wasn't affected or wasn't the subject of the moratorium, but it was affected. The spill happened 50 miles offshore, and thousands of feet of water. Shallow industry has been drilling, but just to give you a sense of what. So Louisiana has been dealing with quite a significant number of catastrophes of all different makings and kinds, and so unfortunately our delegation, and me in particular as the chair of the subcommittee on small business, chair of the committee on small business, but also chair of the subcommittee on disaster response and recovery for the Homeland Security Committee, have been particularly focused on this issue. So first of all, I want to just say a real heartfelt thank you for the businesses. Most of you are large businesses, I understand, that are here, are representing some of the largest industries in our country and the world, and we thank you for stepping up. When you turn your television sets on and could still see the visual of the Superdome or the Convention Center and wondering what in the heck was going on or not going on with the government. Where was the government? Why wasn't it better organized? And you just sort of didn't wait to find the answer, but you stepped up and did what you could, whether you were UPS or Siemens or Microsoft or Goldman Sachs or Shell or Chevron, and said, my business can do this well, and we're going to do it, and the federal government can figure it out on the back end. And we're grateful for that, because I wasn't just watching the television, I was actually there at the Superdome and the Convention Center and on Canal Street, and My brother, who's now the mayor of the city, was literally in a boat going down, Judge Perez Drive, which some of you may be familiar with, is the main avenue of St. Bernard, basically connecting the lower 9th Ward and St. Bernard, in a boat, high enough where he said it was really quite a feeling, Mary. He was telling me when he came back from one of his rescue missions that you could actually reach up and touch the red light. It was a very eerie feeling to be in a boat where you could just sort of lift up your hand. You didn't have to stand or reach. You just sort of went with the flow and touched the red light as you were going down the street, which is how high the water was in parts of the area that I represent, 12 to 14 feet. It's much different than a flood that's beneath your knees, where you can carry your children or carry your parents if you need to, or manage to get out of the water. It's a whole nother thing to be in a flood that is a rushing water situation that's above your head and above the roof of your home. And it was terrifying, and of course, we lost 1,800 people. It was very interesting. Our government still hasn't come to focus with really the significance of this loss. I was just in the Netherlands, amazingly. Well, on this point, interesting that I remembered it right now. I was just in the Netherlands. It was my third trip there to kind of go find some people in the world that actually know how to build levees that don't break, and to find people that actually understand what it is like to live in and around water, and that they do have a sense of awareness that they live in a water place or a delta. We have no concept of that in coastal U.S., in my view. Even in my own state, we're getting it in South Louisiana. It's taken us a couple of destructions for us to finally, wake up and realize what's going on here. But anyway, the Netherlands gets it. They've been doing it for 1,000 years, so they're a few hundred years ahead of us. But I was walking through their museum, which is what made me think of this. They have a museum in the Zeeland province, which is the northern part of southern, thank you. I was thinking that was wrong, the southern part of the Netherlands. And they've just opened their museum in commemoration of the 1953 flood, where the Netherlands, basically a big part of it, maybe a third or a fourth of the whole country went underwater. Now, this was after World War II. They were already devastated. They were, flat on their backs after the war. They'd been bombed, although they surrendered early in that conflict, but nonetheless, their economy was in ruins, and then, of course, the water comes out of the North Sea. But the point is, they had the names of the people that died in that flood. And it was all adults and one little baby that actually had been born that night that perished. And they had the names scrolled in the most beautiful way. And I got very emotional watching that, because as the senator, I still haven't seen the list of the people that died in my state. And I'm not even 100% sure that anyone, I'm sure someone is recording where they are or who they were. But we've been so busy trying to rebuild the area that it was a very emotional time. I think our country still hasn't completely come to grips with the fact that we did lose. And I know to the Netherlands, losing 1,800 people is a little different than our country, because our country is so much bigger. They have 16 million people. We have 350 million. But it's still a human life. And it was still a tragedy in some ways that have been completely avoided, because I want to make this group really clear. It wasn't the hurricane that did us in. The hurricane came and went. The sun was out the next day. The hurricane was not the problem for the city of New Orleans. We, the city, survived it. It's why people were out, like the Butlers who live in my neighborhood next to my parents, and we lost 4 homes in my own family. An elderly African-American couple that lived just a few houses down from my parents were out, sweeping their lawn. But the levees broke. It was a federal levee infrastructure system that should have held and didn't hold, and it broke in 53 places. And it put a city that is below sea level, it just filled up like a swimming pool, and the region, it was just a flood of biblical proportions. And I never really thought President Bush explained this very well the whole time he was the president, so I try to take a little time with groups like this to explain why you heard so much crying and whining and crying and gnashing of teeth from the people down there, because we never really felt people understood what happened to us. This wasn't like Hurricane Andrew, where it sort of came in and the wind blew everything down. It wasn't like Camille. It wasn't even like what happened to the coast of Mississippi, where it really was a hurricane and a wind event. If you go down to Waveland to this day, if any of you are from the southern part of Mississippi or Alabama, it's going to take 20 or 30 years for that Gulf Coast, you know, Waveland, past Christian, Bay St. Louis to come back. It took that long after Camille. But New Orleans is not on a beach. New Orleans is not Pensacola. New Orleans is 70 miles from the water, you know, if you just sort of drew a straight line from the Gulf. We're like being in downtown Washington, D.C. I mean, we're 40 minutes from the, you know, from the bay, from Annapolis. And to wake up and to have your city filled with 14 feet of water, it's a pretty startling, frightening sight. So that's what you all came into. And I think your companies could see it, you understood it. Many of you were up in helicopters. Many of your companies were actually trying to get a visual of this, what was going on, and understood that for business to try to survive, even if the businesses themselves weren't affected, they'd lost their regional customer base. So some of you are getting awards today. You know, Yahoo stepped in and helped get businesses up online, and instead of selling their products to the region, which was virtually destroyed, and had the levees broken on the Jefferson Parish side, their two parishes sit side by side. Orleans had 450,000 people. Jefferson Parish had 450,000 people. The levees in Jefferson held. The pumps were turned off prematurely, and it flooded up to people's knees or legs, but it didn't go underwater. Had it gone underwater, I don't know if we would have been able to save this region, because Jefferson was virtually dry, and then the capital city picked up 150,000 people in 4 days, which is another interesting dynamic of a catastrophe, which we haven't figured out. How do you help the host communities? You know, just as much as the communities that are destroyed, how does business step up, like a Home Depot in Baton Rouge that has 100,000 customers on Friday, and then on Monday they have 150,000 customers. So the impact to schools, roads, businesses, and the host communities is something that I'm going to continue to work on. So just briefly, and trying to wrap up, just a big picture of that. Thank you for what you've done to help individually, but I've been pressing this federal government, and as long as I'm a senator, we'll continue to press hard for more changes. I'll give you one. I could give you a whole list, but my staff can provide the details later. For a small business to process a loan, which is the only place in the world they could really go, except for maybe some of your companies that had some financing, was to the federal government, which they should be able to go to in this time of desperation. It took a small business affected by what I just described to you 70 days to process a loan. And when they asked for it, they had to provide copies of their tax receipts for the last 5 years. Now, those tax receipts or tax forms probably were lost in the storm, but the bureaucrats in Washington couldn't seem to understand that they were probably lost in the flood, and that they might have a second copy up here somewhere in Washington. Since they did pay their taxes, it might be easier for the federal government to find the copy than for my constituents to have to go dig through the muck in their homes to find it, but that was not recognized up here. So that's the kind of fight that I had to put up, and it's a good thing that I have, you know, the temperament to be able to do that when I have to. But that was kind of the nonsensical baloney that we had to go through. So I hope as business people, you should be kind of ashamed of the federal response, smart enough to figure out what we could do better, help us because this is a work in progress. And it took 70 days to get that loan, all these things that they required. The good news is we've already passed a bill, and we've already tested it on a storm that just happened 3 days. They don't have to provide triplicates, their tax cuts, the tax forms that they've paid. So we have made some progress, and I could give you a whole list of things. But when Katrina happened, this country was so wholly unprepared to respond to a catastrophic disaster. So I'd say we've come light years since then. But frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a long way to go. One day, a tsunami will hit Seattle. One day, a Category 4 or 5 hurricane will hit Long Island and New York. One day, Memphis will have an earthquake in that Memphis area. You can talk to the people from Homeland Security. You can get your people to call their people and find out what the risks are. And I'm still very sure that our government, being the best government in the world, and we are, for all of our faults, we really are the best for a large country, and maybe the best of all. There are some small countries that could give us a run for our money, but among the large countries, the way they're organized, we're the best. We still are wholly unprepared to answer to a catastrophic disaster where you have 1 million people homeless overnight, 300,000 children that have no place to go to school. We still haven't passed the bill to allow, if it happened today, if 300,000 children were displaced like they were after Katrina, we still don't have the law in place that would allow them to find a school home anywhere and allow the federal government to cut a check for $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 or $9,000 to keep them in school temporarily. We still haven't passed that bill. I've been trying for now 6 or 7 years. Lamar Alexander and I have that. So to end with, there's plenty of work to continue to do. I thank this committee for existing, for helping us, to give me good suggestions in our committee. I look forward to strengthening that partnership, and congratulations to those that win the awards. And any really good ideas you come up with, come give them to us and we'll share the credit with you. God bless you all. Thank you so much.